Good morning, beautiful people of planet Earth, and I guess not so beautiful ones. We can't all be, aesthetically attractive. Some of us are just plain and ordinary and mundane, and some of us are extraordinary and beatific and supernatural. Some of us sell our souls to have whatever it is we think we might have, and sometimes it's wish fulfillment, sometimes it's law of attraction type manifestations, sometimes it's just getting older and no longer giving a fuck about what anyone thinks of you, and not having that constant tension and pressure of trying to fit other people's expectations of you helps you grow into your own isness. The business of isness, of being your own true self and loving what's left of your, in my case, quite gravel rash life, babies. We're just going to be disturbed by the garbage collector because it's Wednesday. The time is 11:15 a.m. on the 12th of February 2025. I've been awake since 9. It's a beautiful morning. Looks like we're going to get some rain, but it's been a beautiful morning so far. So I thought I would pick things out at random from the mysteries of the explained, which is kind of a pain in my ass, because if I pick things out at random and I want to continue reading from this book, I'll have to remember which things I've already read from. So perhaps I'll write that down, because otherwise it's going to be anarchy and chaos. I try to remember and have to go back over videos and not know where I'm at and create confusion and distortions in my personal timeline, confluence of energetic transfer and congruencies or incongruencies, as the case may be. So I've just opened up and I've read the preface, and I was just going to go through and read the whole damn book, but I don't think I want to. I don't think I want to do it like I did with Ghost Stories, go chapter by chapter. It's too much of a commitment, people of Earth, and I'm older and tired and... Well, anyway, let's just see what we can see. Pardon me. Let's read. This is under the chapter of prophecies. There's a lot of Christian stuff that I just find, sorry, to my mind boring, so I'm not going to read about that. But they did correct it at the end, saying that the Jews don't agree with some of the theological significance attached to prophetic verses in the Old Testament. But they're going to fight like that over religion till, my nostrils turn inside out and my hairs grow into my brain. So I'm not going to buy into that programming and bullshit. It's just ugliness without end. There is only one source field to which we all belong. It doesn't matter where you are on your pathway to enlightenment or where you're coming back down from. My little wasp friend is still here. Thought he would have died by now. He's got nothing to eat in here. Maybe I should let him out. Anyway, I don't want to grab my wasp friend in case he stings me, so there is that. Anyway, he'll work himself out. Perhaps I'll leave the door open later so he can fly out. That might be a kindness. Yes, let wasps fly free. So we'll read A Contest of Oracles. I'm quite fascinated by oracles. More fascinated by oracles than, the Judeo-Christian prophet type prophecies. I wonder why that is. Past life as a oracle myself, perhaps. Oh, well, one doesn't know, does one? Anyway, we'll read A Contest of Oracles, page 14. I'll write that down so we remember where we're at. A Contest of Oracles. Right. Oracles were an accepted part of political and personal life in the ancient world, and the most famous of them remained influential for many hundreds of years. Valuable gifts were bestowed on them by hopeful or grateful inquirers. And look, here he is again. I was going to entice him to land on my hand and then take him outside. But he won't. He won't subscribe to that. But where were we? Interrupted by a wasp. Sorry, where were we? Valuable gifts were bestowed on them by hopeful or grateful inquirers, and many of the shrines housed with great wealth. Each oracle had its own method of divination. The oracle at Dodona, for example, the oldest in Greece, was an oak tree whose oracles were interpreted by a priest from the rustling of its leaves, the cooing of doves in its branches, and the clanking of the brass vessels hung from it. It's clever, isn't it? The reputation and success of the oracles were as variable as their methods, and a troubled inquirer with no previous loyalties involved might well be uncertain as to where to turn for help. This can be a problem. Too many fortune tellers and too many bloody charlatans, and a lot of them not knowing any better than your own intuition on how to proceed. That's why it's very important.
There's no such thing as ghosts.
That's why it's very important to know thyself. Right, what's going on here? I'm trying to charge my iPhone and it came up with a video. Well, anyway, that's all good people are there. Yes, know thyself. Then you don't need to seek validation or inquire any guidance from outside of yourself. If you develop a relationship with the Source, the Holy One, Creator, God, whatever you want to call that energy, you don't need outside intervention usually. Well, I'm finding as I get older I depend less on external input and validations and just drive my own bus, babies. Most of the time I'm licking the windows while I'm driving the bus and my view's a bit obscured. I'm in denial, but anyway, you feel my vibe. You feel my vibe, don't you? Drive your own bus. Live your best life. To thine own self be true. With harm to none, competition with none, so it is done. Waspy's going to drive me mad. I'm going to have to go down and buy fly spray and murder him. Oh, but he's lived this long harmonic resonance with me. It's getting a bit frantic though. He's on my car. Oh, he keeps flying away. I was going to put him outside. Maybe if I trap him in a jar and put him outside. Yeah, bear with me. He's going to drive me crazy that he's got nothing to eat. Drank my water yesterday. We'll just trap him in the jar. my wasp. Spiritual meaning of you is Mama T has to take action. Take action, getting you out of my house. Yes? Yes. Eyes on my finger. Okay. Out you go. You don't belong in this house. You need to eat something outside. You go. Get off me. Good boy. Where lives. Didn't need the jar after all. Right. Waspy gets to live another day. Get out there and find something to eat for itself. And I get to concentrate on my story. Right. Oh. Mama T needs to take action. I don't even know where we're at. Oh yes. Might be uncertain as to where to turn for help. Right. This was the position in which Croesus, the inordinately rich king of Lydia, in the mid-6th century BC, found himself when the strength and ambition of his Persian neighbours grew to alarming proportions under the rule of Cyrus the Great. What danger did Cyrus pose to Lydia, and with whom might the king of Lydia most profitably ally himself to forestall the threat? That would be a bit of a concern for a king. These were important questions facing Croesus, and he felt the need for oracular help. But which oracle could he rely on? There were 6 famous ones in Greece and 1 in Egypt, and each had its enthusiastic devotees. Croesus therefore decided to approach the problem scientifically by testing the oracles before committing himself. 7 messengers, 1 to each shrine, were dispatched from Lydia on the same day and told to pose their question exactly 100 days from the departure date. The question each was to ask was, "What is King Croesus, son of Alyattes, now doing?" Each was then to return to Lydia with the answer with all speed. The record of only 1 reply has survived, that given by the Oracle of Delphi at the foot of the southern slope of Mount Parnassus. Here, in the temple of Apollo, the human source of the oracle, traditionally a woman named the Pythoness, sat on a golden tripod above a, that would be really uncomfortable. Trust me to think of that though. Above a deep cleft in the rock, chewing leaves of the laurel sacred to Apollo, and inhaling the fumes that rose around her from the cleft. Her mutterings, when presented with a question, were frenzied and incomprehensible, and were translated for the questioner, usually in verse, by the attendant priest. Croesus' messenger had scarcely set foot inside the shrine when the oracle spoke without even waiting for his question. "I can count the sands and I can measure the ocean. I have ears for the silent and know what the dumb man meaneth. Lo, on my sense there striketh the smell of a shell-covered tortoise, boiling now in a fire, with the flesh of a lamb in a cauldron. Brass is the vessel below, and brass the cover above it." This reply was taken back to Croesus, and he unhesitatingly placed his trust in the oracle of Delphi. After much consideration, he had chosen to perform on the day of the test the most improbable act he could think of, and so he had taken a lamb and a tortoise, cut them into pieces, and set them to boil together in a brass cauldron with a brass lid. There's a picture of the oracle. Let's find something else. The Seaforth Doom. Some called him the Warlock of the Glen, and others the Brahan Seer. Let me just make a note of that. Page 18, page 14. Right. His real name was Connor Oda in Gaelic. And I don't think I pronounced that accurately. It's written in Gaelic. Dear goddess. All the Gaelic speaking people are just slapping me up the side of the head right now. It's spelt Coinneach and the surname Odhar. Or Kenneth Mackenzie in English. He lived in Scotland in the 17th century. The seer who looked into the future through a hole in a white stone, which sounds like a hag stone, a stone with a hole in it's called a hag stone, and you can indeed use it for prophecy. Is said to have foreseen the bloody battle of Culloden and the cutting of the Caledonian Canal, the narrow Loch-linking waterway that runs across Scotland from Loch Lynee in southwest to the Moray Firth at Inverness. But what Mackenzie is most famed for is undoubtedly the doom of the Seaforths. The story of the Doom, capital D-O-O-M, begins in 1660 when the Earl of Seaforth travelled from Bran Castle, his home, to Paris, leaving behind his wife Isabella, a woman reputedly as ugly as she was violent and uncouth. It's not a very kind thing to say about a woman, is it? I wonder what made her violent and uncouth, though. Women don't just simply behave like that out of ordinary, circumstances. We're usually formed that way by childhood abuse. Just saying. Although some people are just evil and uncouth, so they can't always blame it on trauma. Some people just like being arseholes. Met quite a few of those on my day too. Where was I? Pondering people. Time passed. The day of the Earl's scheduled return to Brahan came and went, and still he remained in Paris. Slowly it dawned on Isabella that her husband might have found more pleasant company in Paris than she had been providing at Brahan Castle. It's the nature of the beast, isn't it? You're going to go where you get pleasant company. Day by day, the certainty that the Earl was deceiving her grew stronger, and so did her jealousy. One night, when the big hall at Brahan was crowded with guests, she summoned the seer and asked him if he could see her husband through his viewing stone. Mackenzie put the stone to his eye and was overcome with laughter. What was he laughing at? Isabella demanded. He refused to tell her. Her fury mounting, Isabella insisted, and at last the Brahan seer told her that he saw the Earl with one girl on his knee and another stroking his hair. Isabella's rage at the news was uncontrollable. She ordered her servants to seize the sage. Some accounts say that she had him hanged there in Brahan Castle, and others that she charged him before the authorities with practising witchcraft, and that as a result he was burned to death in a barrel of tar. Horrific. Just for telling the truth. So don't shoot the messenger, people of Earth. They did that in those days. In either case, all sources agree that before he died in 1663, Mackenzie pronounced the famous Doom of the Seaforths as follows. I see into the future, and I read the doom of the race of my oppressor. The long descended line of Seaforth will, ere many generations have passed, end in extinction and sorrow. I see a chief, the last of his house, both deaf and dumb. He will be the father of 4 fair sons, all of whom he will follow to the tomb. He will live careworn and die mourning, knowing that the honours of his line are to be extinguished forever, and that no future chief of the Mackenzies shall bear rule at Brahan or in Kintail. After lamenting over the last and most promising of his sons, he himself shall sink into the grave, and the remnant of his possessions shall be inherited by a white coiffed lassie from the east, and she is to kill her sister. And as a sign by which it may be known that these things are coming to pass, there shall be 4 great lairds in the days of the last deaf and dumb Seaforth, Gairloch, Chisholm, Grant, and Raysay, of whom one shall be buck-toothed, another hare-lipped, another half-witted, and the 4th a stammerer. Chiefs distinguished by these personal marks shall be the allies and neighbours of the last Seaforth. And when he looks around him and sees them, he may know that his sons are doomed to death, that his broad lands shall pass away to the stranger, and that his race shall come to an end. For the next 135 years, the fortunes of the Seaforth family waxed and waned. In the revolution of 1688, they supported James II, the Roman Catholic king who fled to France, and in 1715 they supported his son James, the Old Pretender. For their pains they were stripped of their lands and title. By the mid-18th century, the political loyalties of the Seaforths brought them back into royal favour, and by 1783, when Francis Humberston Mackenzie inherited the estates, their lands and forfeited title had been restored. By this time, the doom of the Seaforths was little more than a vague memory. The new lord had 4 sons and 6 daughters, and though scarlet fever had left him deaf and dumb in his childhood, he later recovered his power of speech. There seemed little chance that the Seaforth line was coming to an end. As for his neighbours, it could be no more than a sinister coincidence that Mackenzie of Gairloch should be buck-toothed, that Chisholm of Chisholm should have a hare lip, that Grant of Grant should be a half-wit, and MacLeod of Raysay an incurable stammerer. Don't you love when revenge on a seer comes true? It took quite some time, but the man was gifted after all. For that they burned him in tar. But his curse finally came true, babies. I love that when that happens. I love that when that happens. Then one of Seaforth's sons died, then another, then still another. The 4th boy was now in poor health, and his father sent him to England for medical treatment. Despite this, the 4th and last son also died. As the warlock had prophesied, the deaf and dumb lord outlived all his sons, and when he died in 1815, the Seaforth title lapsed. The first part of the doom had been fulfilled precisely. Seaforth's estates were inherited by his daughter, Mary Elizabeth Frederica. She had married Sir Samuel Hood, an admiral who, after serving with Nelson in the Battle of the Nile, had become Commander-in-Chief of the East Indies, a position that took him and Mary to India. Sir Samuel died at Madras shortly before Lord Seaforth. Mary came home wearing the traditional widow's white cap, as the doom said they would. The Seaforth lands had passed into the hands of a white-coiffed lassie from the east. In fact, the Seaforth estate was by now much diminished by mismanagement, extravagance, and government fines. Mary found herself obliged to sell still more of the property, including the Isle of Lewis. Piece by piece, the broad lands of the Seaforths were indeed passing away to the stranger. The last chapter in the fulfilment of the doom of the Seaforths occurred a few years later as Mary was taking her young sister Caroline for a drive through the woods in a pony carriage. Without warning, the ponies bolted and the carriage was overturned. Mary was cut and bruised, but her sister died from her injuries. The lassie from the east had killed her sister, or had, at least, been instrumental in her death, just as Kenneth Mackenzie had foretold. The final salute. If a person dreams that he will die in a certain situation, we have, of course, no means of knowing if the warning was false or if fate has been cheated. It's not so simple to cheat fate. It really is not. Mama T has cheated death multiple times, but that wasn't all by her own choosing. Literally got vomited back here multiple times. I'm not always happy about it, as you can tell. But anyway, they sent me back to survive this current hellscaping. They promised me I would be okay. And I am okay, I guess. I'm surviving it so far quite admirably. Don't ask me how. With a little bit of sweetness from my true loving friends. It's the only reason I'm still here, quite frankly. Dear Goddess. Anyway, one night in July 1750, Robert Morris Sr., the father of the Robert Morris who managed the financial affairs of the American Revolution, dreamed that he would be killed by cannon fire from a naval ship he was to visit. The dream made him so nervous that he was persuaded to board the vessel only by the captain's promise that no guns would be fired until he was safely back on land. The visit was made, and at its conclusion, the captain gave instructions that no salute be fired until he signalled that the rowboat had returned Morris safely to shore. But while the boat was still within range of the ship's gun, a fly settled on the captain's nose, and he thoughtlessly raised his hand to brush it away. This gesture was taken as a sign that the salute should be fired, and so it was. A fragment of the blast struck Morris and wounded him fatally. Then we have a kind of an explanation here. I'll just read that little blurb. The intermediate present. Most theories of prophecy concentrate on what are professed to be ambiguities and uncertainties in our conventional notion of what the future is, and claim that the future either unfolds in or coexists with the present. Apparently there are several outcomes of any present moment in time given on your destiny or actions or thought process, or the people surrounding you, I guess, would have to come into play. Because all the world's a stage and all the people in it merely players, people of Earth. But there must be, in parallel universes, there are all sorts of different outcomes, different timelines, different possibilities and potentiates. Meanwhile, I sit here still languishing, alive against my own will at times, in housing commission. Ah, never mind. There was nothing I could have done differently, surrounded by monsters as I was since early childhood. And I'm grateful that, as far as I can tell, I'm no longer surrounded by monsters. I've survived all of them. So, I guess I can't give myself any credit for that either. It was sometimes quite supernatural interventions to help me survive those dastardly dark motherfuckers. A somewhat novel approach to the problem, focusing on ambiguities in what we call the present, was proposed in 1934 by H. F. Saltmarsh. Saltmarsh begins by pointing out that what we conventionally name the present is nothing of the kind. For when we perceive something, the fall of a leaf, the prick of a pin, we regard our perception and what it reveals as occurring simultaneously in time. But sensory impressions do not occur all at once. We feel the pinprick an instant after it happens. The leaf touches the ground an instant before we register the landing. For in addition to the time it takes for sensory impressions to reach our brain, is the time it takes our brain to process the signals when they arrive. Thus, based on Saltmarsh's proposal, our perception of any happening is inevitably a bit later than the event itself. Sometimes you don't react till much, much later if you have complex PTSD too. It can be astonishing at times. Thus, based on Saltmarsh's proposal, I read that. Consequently, we have two kinds of present. The interval between these two presents might well be considered a third level or intermediate present in which events can occur or begin to occur. We can further conjecture that it is in this third level of time that certain people receive intimations of the future. You literally go out of space-time into another dimension and then pop back in. That has happened to me on rare occasions. Because all transitions take time, we can hardly suppose that the contents of the intermediate present pass into our awareness intact or unchanged. We can therefore say that the intermediate present, like the real present, is unavailable to ordinary consciousness, and that its contents can never be quite the same as those of our normal awareness. It is in this nether area between an event and the perception of it that precognition might occur. We'll continue on reading these various little premonitions or prophecies. Swedenborg's vision. Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 72, was equally famous in his native Sweden as a scientist, a mystical theologian, and a clairvoyant. A well-authenticated instance of the latter ability, investigated by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, occurred on July 19, 1759, in Göteborg, a port on Sweden's southwest coast. It was a Saturday, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Swedenborg had just returned to Göteborg from a visit to England when he became restless and upset. He excused himself to his friends and went for a walk. Upon his return, he told them that he had seen in a vision a fire that had broken out near his house 300 miles away and was now raging through his hometown. He remained distressed until 8 p.m. when he informed his friends that the fire was now extinguished. News of the vision spread quickly, and Swedenborg was asked to describe it in person to the governor. On Monday morning, a royal messenger arrived in Göteborg with news of the fire and confirmed Swedenborg's vision in all particulars. Astonishing, isn't it? Truth follows fiction. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published a grim tale called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. In it, 3 survivors of a shipwreck. Don't know why I can't speak English today. I slept well. Don't know what's wrong with me, people of Earth. In it, 3 survivors of a shipwreck, dying of thirst and starvation, kill and eat their companion, Richard Parker, who lost when they drew lots. What an awful fate. Awful. In 1884, 3 survivors of a shipwreck were tried for the murder of a 4th. Adrift and facing starvation, they had killed and eaten their companion, a cabin boy named Richard Parker. In Poe's tale of horror on the high seas, the shipwrecked Pym and his companions joyously greet an approaching brig, only to find that all aboard are dead of a virulent disease. So they had no choice but to eat one of them, their own survivors. The murder of Hart Northey. The following vision of a brother's murder was recorded by the English journalist William T. Stead, 1842 to 1912, editor of the Pall Mall Gazette and founder of the Review of Reviews. Stead was a champion of social reform and in later life became interested in psychical research. He had been given the story by persons intimately acquainted with George Northey, the brother of Hart, the murdered man. From childhood, their lives had been marked by the strongest brotherly affection. They had lived in St. Eglos in Cornwall, England, which is situated about 10 miles from the Atlantic and not quite so far from the old market town of Trebodwina. Don't know how to pronounce that. Trebodwina. Dear Goddess. Dear Goddess, people of Earth. George and Hart had never been separated since their birth, until the former became a sailor. Hart at the same time joined his father in business. In February 1840, George Northey's ship was lying in port at St. Helena. While he was there, George had a strange dream, which he himself related. I dreamed that my brother Hart was at Tribadwena market, and that I was with him, quite close by his side, during the whole of the market transactions. Although I could see and hear everything which passed around me, I felt sure that it was not my bodily presence which thus accompanied him, but my shadow, or rather my spiritual self, for he seemed quite unconscious that I was near him. I felt that my being thus present in this strange way betokened some hidden danger which he was destined to meet, and which I knew my presence could not avert, for I could not speak to warn him of his peril. Brother, having collected a considerable sum of money, then started on his ride homeward. My terror gradually increased as Hart approached the hamlet of Polkero, until I was in a perfect frenzy, frantically desirous, yet unable, to warn my brother in some way and prevent him going further. I suddenly became aware of two dark shadows thrown across the road. Two men appeared, whom I instantly recognized as notorious poachers, who lived in a lonely wood near St. Eglos. The men wished him "Good evening, maester," civilly enough. He replied, and entered into conversation with them about some work he had promised them. After a few minutes they asked him for some money. The elder of the two brothers, who was standing near the horse's head, said, "Mr. Northey, we know you have just come from Tribadwena market, with plenty of money in your pockets. We are desperate men, and you bean't going to leave this place until we've got that money, so hand over." My brother made no reply, except to slash at him with the whip and spur the horse at him. The younger of the ruffians instantly drew a pistol and fired. Hart dropped lifeless from the saddle, and one of the villains held him by the throat with a grip of iron for some minutes, as though to make assurance doubly sure, and crush out any particle of life my poor brother might have left. The murderers secured the horse to a tree in the orchard, and, having rifled the corpse, they dragged it up the stream, concealing it under the overhanging banks of the watercourse. They then carefully covered over all marks of blood on the road, and hid the pistol in the thatch of a disused hut close to the roadside. Then, setting the horse free to gallop home alone, they decamped across the country to their own cottage. George Northey's vessel left St. Helena the next day and reached Plymouth in due course. During the entire voyage back home, George Northey was constantly under the firm conviction that his brother Hart had been murdered, and that the vision had shown him the details and the murderers. He eventually reached port and his family. His brother Hart had been murdered, exactly as he had visioned. The crime had aroused widespread horror and indignation, and every effort of the authorities had been bent upon discovering the murderers and bringing them to justice. 2 brothers named Heightwood were suspected. A search was made of their cottage, which revealed blood-stained garments, but no trace of the pistol was to be found, although the younger brother admitted having one, but said he had lost it. The brothers were arrested and brought before the magistrates. The evidence against them was certainly not strong, but their manner seemed that of guilty men. They were ordered to be tried at the forthcoming assizes at Tribodwina. Each confessed in the hope of saving his life, and both were sentenced to be hung. There was, however, some doubt about the pistol. Before the execution, George Northey arrived from St. Helena and declared that the pistol was in the thatch of the old cottage close by the place where his brother Hart had been murdered and where the Heightwood brothers had hidden it. "How did you know?" he was asked, after the weapon had been found at the place he stated. "I saw the foul deed committed in a dream, which I had the night of the murder," he declared. Mark Twain's dream. In the 1850s, I'll just write that down, sorry. In the 1850s, young Mark Twain and his brother Henry worked together on the river boats then plying the Mississippi between St. Louis and New Orleans. One night, during a stay at a sister's house in St. Louis, Twain had an unusually vivid dream. In it he saw his brother's corpse lying in a metal coffin in his sister's sitting room. The coffin rested on 2 chairs, and a bouquet with a single crimson flower at its centre had been placed on Henry's chest. When Twain awoke, he was quite convinced that his brother had died and was lying in the sitting room. He dressed, thought of visiting the corpse, but decided to take a walk first. He left the house and had gone half a block before he realised he had been dreaming. He then returned and told his sister of the dream. A few weeks later, Twain and his brother were together in New Orleans, but took different boats back to St. Louis. Henry's passage was on the Pennsylvania, whose boilers exploded not far from Memphis, killing many people. Henry was badly injured and taken in great pain to Memphis, where he died a few days later. Although most victims of the accident were buried in wooden coffins, a number of Memphis women, moved by pity for the young man, raised the money to provide a metal coffin. Thus, when Mark Twain came to say his last farewells to his brother, he found the body lying in a metal coffin, just as it had been in his dream. The bouquet, however, was missing. But as Twain stood beside the body, a woman entered the room and placed on Henry's chest a bouquet of white flowers. At its centre was a single red rose. The maxim Mark Twain scrawled beneath this 1897 photograph of himself reveals his celebrated humour. The writer was deeply interested in psychical phenomena, and underneath it he wrote, "Be good and you will be lonesome." Mark Twain. How very fucking true that is. Be good, or be in good company with people who actually love you and have your back, your front and your sides, and value and cherish you and enjoy your company. But be careful of the company you keep. Having survived monsters in the past, I'm necessarily wary. The Priest of Bel. I was going to read random things throughout the book and I'm stuck on all these premonitions. So no, I won't read that. Fuck it. We'll find something else of a different topic to read from. What to read from, people of Earth? What to read from? So much to choose from. It's like a feast of the paranormal. Here's something that looks like it might be interesting. The tools of tiny people. Let me write that down. The tools of tiny people. In the last years of the 19th century, hundreds of flint tools were found beneath the moorland peat of East Lancashire's Pennine Hills. By their minute size, they seem to belong not to the province of ancient man, but rather to the world of dwarfs or gnomes. Titania's realm, are we right? Not all fairy are tiny though, just saying. Come in all shapes and sizes. None of the tools found, scrapers, borers and tiny crescent-shaped knives, was longer than half an inch. Half an inch is basically a centimetre, isn't it? Yeah, roughly. Just over a centimetre. That's amazing. I've never heard that story before. Something new even for the psychedelic dreamer to discover. Oh, what fun. Discovering new things at my almost 60 years of existence on this planet. What new things might I yet discover the longer I live on planet Earth? This is why reading out loud stories on YouTube is so good for me. Right. And many were smaller than a quarter of an inch. How can that possibly be, people of Earth? Is this fake news? Is it real? I don't know. We'll go with it. We'll just read the story and suspend belief. The flaking by which they were shaped and brought to a sharp edge was so fine that in many cases it could only be appreciated through a magnifying glass. That the flints were not bird points used for bird hunting seems evident from the fact that nothing resembling an arrowhead was found among them. And while the scrapers and borers may conceivably have been fitted with wooden handles, they are far too small to be used by ordinary human hands. Two observations suggest that this was not done. No board or engraved materials were found in conjunction with the flints, and even with handles, the scrapers would have been hopelessly impractical for the task of scraping flesh from animal hides. The same observations apply to the crescent-shaped knives, which were, in any case, clearly not designed to have handles or to be placed in wooden holders. For such reasons, some have guessed that the knives were ritual replicas of the crescent moon. But why, in that case, they should have been found alongside small versions of conventional tools is a mystery, unless those too are supposed to have had a ritual purpose. To label ancient objects of unknown purpose as ritual instruments is, of course, a remedy commonly applied by puzzled archaeologists. If the Lancashire finds had been unique, they would probably have been forgotten, but other examples of tools apparently fashioned by a miniature people were found in England beneath the floor of a drowned forest in Devon and in the sandy heathland of Suffolk. And more finds of pygmy flints have been made in other parts of the world, in Egypt, Africa, Australia, France, and Sicily, for example, and in India, where small crescent-shaped knives of flint and agate were found in caves in the Vindhya hills. Whoever the makers of the pygmy flints were, and whatever their purpose, they seem to have been an established class of artisans, and to have plied their delicate craft from one end of the world to the other. Living animals locked in stone. A horned lizard that had been found alive in a block of stone, so solid as to preclude the entrance of the smallest insect, was sent to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington by Judge Horton of New Mexico in 1853. The lizard lived for 2 days after its release. That's just astonishing, isn't it? My goodness. During excavations being made for the Hartlepool Waterworks in Durham, England in 1865, workmen inadvertently freed a living toad from a block of magnesium, it does say magnesian limestone, 25 feet below ground level. The cavity in which the toad had been contained was no larger than its body and presented the appearance of being a cast of it. The toad's eyes shone with unusual brilliancy, and it was full of vivacity on its liberation. It appeared, when first discovered, desirous to perform the process of respiration, but evidently experienced some difficulty, and the only sign of success consisted of a barking noise, which it continues invariably to make at present on being touched. The toad is in the possession of Mr. S. Horner, the President of the Natural History Society, and continues in as lively a state as when found. On a minute examination, its mouth is found to be completely closed, and the barking noise it makes proceeds from its nostrils. The claws of its 4 feet are turned inwards, and its hind ones are of extraordinary length, and, unlike the present English toad, the toad, when first released, was of a pale colour, and not readily distinguished from the stone, but shortly after its colour grew darker, until it became a fine olive brown. A local clergyman and geologist, the Reverend Robert Taylor, expressed the opinion that the toad was 6,000 years old. At the last report, 1865, the creature was to be given a place of honour in the Hartlepool Museum, its primary habitation, the rock, being provided for accommodation, should it so desire. The Leeds Mercury, April 8, 1865, as quoted in the Zoologist, 23:9630, 1865. A living toad was liberated from a cavity near the centre of a large rock by workmen digging for ore at Puswick, Derby, England in 1852. They came upon the rock, actually a large lump of ore, at a depth of 12 feet below ground level, and since it was too large for 2 men to lift, they began to break it up with their picks. The cavity in which they found the toad was nearly 6 inches in diameter, considerably larger than the animal itself. It was lined with crystals, perhaps of carbonate of lime. The toad died very soon after being exposed to air. It's astonishing, isn't it? I find these quite interesting. Toads in the coal, an occasional hell. There are 3 ways, broadly speaking, to account for the numerous reports of living creatures recovered from cavities in solid rock thousands of years old. The most decisive way is to declare, as one Captain Buckland did, when a toad supposedly released from the lump of coal in a Welsh mine was exhibited at the Great Exhibition in 1862, that such things are a gross imposition, the work of fools and bunglers, whose words and eyes are not to be trusted. A less impetuous explanation maintains that although the stone in which these creatures are found may appear to be solid, it actually contains fissures through which water, air, and perhaps even nutrients may enter. In the case of limestone, these fissures may become sealed by seeping carbonate of lime, the chemical from which stalactites and stalagmites are formed. To the untrained eye, the new deposits would not be distinguishable from the old rock, and the limestone would seem to be a solid, uniform mass. The third account of such things is the most interesting, but is not verifiable by any ordinary means. It can be illustrated by a story from Tibet. In the latter part later part of the 19th century, a venerable Lama named Situ Pimu Wangyal Rinpoche was making a journey to Lhasa in the company of several friends. One day, much to the alarm of his companions, he fell into an unusually wrathful mood, and that evening insisted on making camp on a barren plain where neither firewood nor water could be found. The next morning, still in a bad humour, he obliged the party to leave the route for Lhasa and to set out in a northerly direction that led, so far as his companions knew, to nowhere in particular. Since they held him in considerable esteem, however, they followed him without question. After several days, they came to an enormous outcrop of rock, which Situ Rinpoche announced it was their task to break open. Since they had no tools but their wooden staffs, they fared poorly in this task, and, already alarmed by their leader's behaviour, they withdrew some 50 to 60 feet to confer, leaving Situ Rinpoche standing by the rock. Whereupon the Lama took his staff and struck the rock a single blow. It shattered and revealed within a large, repulsive-looking creature, somewhat like a salamander, its scaly black skin stuck to the rock, panting for breath. Situ Rinpoche gently lifted the animal out of the rock and set it down on the ground in front of him. He then sat down and began to perform a certain yoga on the animal's behalf. In Tibetan, this yoga is called Pho Wa and is usually described as involving a transfer of consciousness. It is performed by lamas for the benefit of the dying. After a while, a narrow column of rainbow-coloured light rose from the creature's head, and it died. Funeral rites were performed, and soon afterward the body was burned. Afterward, Situ Rinpoche explained that he had liberated the animal, which in a previous life had had a connection with him, from one of the occasional hells. In the Buddhist description of other realms of existence, these occasional hells lie outside the main circles of hell and are sometimes encountered in this world. Very often they are instanced by the enclosure of a living creature in solid rock. Something to think about. The last of the pterodactyls, flying reptiles with leathery wings and long toothy beaks, died about 100 million years ago, according to established scientific opinion. But, in the experience of a number of startled French workmen, the last one died in the winter of 1856. Just one minute, my battery's kaput. Someone sent me a message I didn't even realise. I'll just check that out. Oh no. Oh. One of my suppliers occasionally buy gemstones from is closing down. Oh. Damn. Oh well, on a positive note, she's going back to university in May. So she's pursuing her studies and career. Let me just quickly reply to that. Lovely woman. Right. Right, where were we? Sorry. I get distracted by these things. But I am disappointed because I've bought a few little stones from her. Anyway, to find another supplier, won't I? So many fucking shonky suppliers. It's hard to find someone that's trustworthy. Anyway, where were we? Oh, the last one died in the winter of 1856 in a partially completed railway tunnel between the Saint Dizier and Nancy lines. In the half-light of the tunnel, something monstrous stumbled toward them out of a great boulder of Jurassic limestone they had just split open. Astonishing. It fluttered its wings, croaked, and died at their feet. The creature, whose wingspan was 10 feet 7 inches, had 4 legs joined by a membrane like a bat. I wonder how they could survive so long in rock and yet when they meet our current space-time and fresh air and light of day, drop dead. It's odd, isn't it? I don't understand that. Somebody can explain it to me one day. Maybe when I'm dead. All the secrets of the universe are purported to be revealed. That would be cool. I've got lots of questions that I'm still waiting for answers. Sometimes you just have to make peace with the fact that you'll never get the answer and you have to wait till you transition one day. The creature whose wingspan was 10 feet 7 inches, so just over 10.5 feet. Had 4 legs joined by a membrane like a bat. What should have been feet were long talons, and the mouth was arrayed with sharp teeth. The skin was like black leather, thick and oily. At the nearby town of Grey, the creature was immediately identified by a local student of paleontology as a pterodactyl. The rock stratum in which it had been found was consistent with the period when pterodactyls lived, and the limestone boulder that had imprisoned the winged reptile for millions of years was found to contain a cavity in the form of an exact mould of the creature's body, Imagine being trapped in something like that for millions of years, alive, unable to move. Maybe it was that movement flapping its wings that was put too much strain on its heart that killed it. I mean, I'm just guessing. By the gods, the world truly is an astonishing place. Truly astonishing and miraculous and sometimes delightful, you know. It's not all weird. It's not all weird, dark things. Sometimes it's lovely things. I'm really upset. I lost 3 teeth in August. Look, 3 of them. Oh, that one kind of hurts still. They're all gone black. I look ugly. Ugly, ugly, ugly. That's because that fucking dentist did not do a follow-up. They're murdering me. They're murdering me, people. Well, I have to go and do something about that one that kind of vaguely hurts, because if it's hurting, it's still alive and therefore problematic. It doesn't really hurt a lot though. Just anyway, it's hideous. I'm going to end up. Oh, it's hideous. I'm going to end up with dentures at this rate. It's just hideous. What can you do? Horrendous. I fought to keep my teeth all my life, let down by poor dentistry. It's appalling. What can you do? Smile, 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 and smile. They're not too black. This one here, this one died. I remember when that one died, the nerve went ding like an electric shock. And I went, aha, that tooth has just died. But these ones died without me even noticing. But I was dizzy for about 3 weeks. I went to my now former GP, that asshole, and I said, I'm very dizzy and I don't know why. He didn't think to send me to a dentist, did he? Just said, oh, who knows why you're dizzy. It'll eventually pass, which it did. The dizziness cost me 3 fucking teeth. Anyway, why am I whining about that now? In the middle of my story. Because every now and then, the systemic abuse slams me with a trauma response and it grinds my gears. I too could be locked away in a rock for millennia and come out fighting. Anyway, I just need a hug and $20 million and rip all these dead and dying teethies out and get implants, I guess. With $20 million you could afford them. Almost. Anyway, the world's oldest living creatures were discovered by chance in 1972 in the laboratory of N. Chudanov at the Berezniki Potassium Combine in the Ural Mountains. Oh, that's my cousin calling. I'll just 1 moment, because I did call her this morning. I'll be back. We're back, people. Oh no, she's given up. Everyone wants me all at the same time. No, we're on a mission. I'll call her back later. We'll finish this up because I'm getting tired anyway. That's why I'm scattered everywhere. Chudanov had dissolved a piece of potassium ore in distilled water as part of an effort to explain its red coloration. After a while, he noticed that small flakes of material were beginning to float away from the rock, and when he examined one of them under a microscope, he saw that it contained numerous microorganisms. This was surprising, but not unduly so. Several days later, Chudanov again examined the water in his flask, It was now swarming with living organisms, apparently reanimated by their immersion. He placed some in test tubes and was staggered to see them grow and reproduce, apparently unharmed by being locked inside potassium crystals for 250 million years. From the Soviet Union, February 1972, page 18. Right, we're going to stop there because I'm tired and I'm scattered. My energies are scattered. And I may come back later on today to continue. So wherever you are in the space-time continuum, be still like a creature trapped in a rock. Be patient, be courageous, be forbearing, but beware when you flap your wings that you don't flap them too much and give yourself a heart attack. But fly before you die. Just say bye for now, people there.